Hello everyone and welcome on this course about C language. This video aims to be understandable by everyone, so before learning how to code in C, we're gonna learn what is coding, what is programmation. Basically, programmation is just writing algorithms. So what is an algorithm? And it's just a list of instructions. You say to your computer, do this, then do that, then do that. And all the programs in the world are written like that. A common given algorithm is a cooking recipe. It is written as an algorithm. For example, crack 4 eggs, add 100 grams of flour, blend it with 120 centiliters of milk. If you have vanilla, add some of it, etc., etc. These are a list of instructions. But I'd like to give an example of an algorithm which is closer to what we are doing in programmation. So, this problem, you are given a triangle with the length of all the sides, and the question is this triangle a right angle triangle? An algorithm to solve this problem would look like that. You search for the longest side, here it is BC. You calculated this longer side length to square, here it gives 25. Then you calculate AC square plus AB square, it is 16 plus 9, so 25. If both results are equal, you say it is right angle. Here it is the case. Else, if the both results are not equal, you say it is not right angled. So this is an algorithm that you can do in programmation, and we are going to see how you can do this kind of algorithms in C language. To execute some code in C, we will use onlinegdb.com. You will have a link in the description, and it will allow you to execute some code in C. For example, if you click on the Run button, here you will have the result of your program. So here it is, your first code in C. Let me explain it to you, starting by the first line. The first line, as it says, includes some pre-written code in our program. Here, stdio includes some code to display information on our screen. The third line is a little bit complicated and will be explained in the function chapter. All you have to remember is, when you want to write code, only write it inside those curly braces. If you write anything outside, it will not be executed and it will create an error. Inside those curly braces, you have two instructions, printf and return. Printf is to display information on our screen. Here it will display hello world. And return is to give information to our computer. Here 0 says that everything has been executed correctly. If we test it, it will execute and we will display hello world in our console. If we change the text a little bit and run again, it will display the changements. Now let me introduce you the concept of variable. Variable is like a little box where you can store informations, for example a number, and you can give it a name, NB for example, and whenever you have the need of the information, you call the variable by its name and it will give you the number, here 64. So now, back in the previous example, we'll try to print a variable, to create a variable and print it. So, to create a variable, you say at first what you want to store in it. Is it text? Is it number? Here we want to store a text, so we will give the type car star. We will see types later in this chapter. So here you say the variable will store text. Now you give a name to your variable, for example, my variable equal to say what you want to store, and now you can type the text. Now let's try to print it. It will be a little bit complex because you can't print only the variable like this. Printf is means print format, so you have to write a format here, %s, then your variable. So you say you want to print a text. There are also other persons that we will see later in this chapter. So here it will return an error because we have forgotten a semicolon at the end of the line. Don't forget this or it will create an error and it will not be executed. Now the variable contains hello world and it will be printed here. So let's run hello world like the other example. So now that we've seen how to store and print text, we will see how to store and to use numbers in our program. So like this text variables, we will create a new variable. We will give it the type int, like integer, and we will use only integer numbers. Int, for example, we will store the life of our main character, so int life, and we will assign 20, for example. Don't forget the semicolon. So here we have 20 points of life. If you want to display the life, here you replace my variable by life. But the %s is to display text in our screen. We want to display numbers, so we will use %d. Now we run, and it will display our life points. If we change it to 30, run, it will display 30. But what is interesting with numbers is that we can use operators to do operations on these numbers. For example, you can add numbers. So here, 30 plus 2, and it will display 32. But you can use operations also on variables. For example, let's say we have a regeneration points to 5, and each time we regenerate, it will be 5 by 5. So here our life is 30 plus the regeneration points. And if we print our life, I forgot the semicolon, sorry. If we print our life, it will be 35. So it adds the 30 here and the value stored in regeneration points. As other operators, we can use minus. So it makes 30 minus 5. We can use times, 30 times 5. Also divide it. So you can use all basic operations on variables. You can also use the variables inside these operations. For example, let's say we have regeneration points and life, and then we want the life to be equal to life plus regeneration points. So we regenerate here, and if we run, it will be 35. It will add the previous value of life and the value of regeneration points. Now that we've seen integer type, we'll see the float type. It is also a number type, but it is to store floats, so with decimal numbers. So float, for example, life is equal to 30.5. And now we can use the same operators as integers. So we want to add 5.5 to 30.5, and it will display nothing here because %d is for integers and we want to display a float, so it will be %f. Now it will display 36.000 because it is a float and it displays some numbers after the point. You can use the same operators as the integers, minus. You can use divide, and something interesting with divide is here, so you have the numbers after the point. If life is, for example, an integer, 30, and we divide it by 5.5, it will give a float normally. But because life is an integer, it will be routed to the nearest integer without anything after the point. So here it will display 5 and not 5.545455, for example. So we can use also times. Here, let life be a float again. And there's something, oh yes. So it has returned an error because I wanted to display an integer with %d and passing a float variable. So now with %f, it displays the variable. Now we've seen number types, we can see the textual types. And textual type is a car. So we can store only one character, for example, A, and we can display it. It's all what we're gonna do. So we display a character with %c, and for example, here is only a letter, not life. Life is not equal to A. And it will display the A. So we've seen some minutes ago something called car star, and we can, with the star, put multiple letters, so not only one character. Here, for example, our character name, Argon, I don't know. Character name, and we can display it with %s, and here character name. If we run it, it will display our character name. There's something more to learn about printing some characters like that. It's if you want to print on multiple lines. For example, I want to print Argon on the first line, Xenon on the second line, etc., etc. If we make another print, for example, print f, sorry, %s with a second character name, and here we create a second character name called Xenon, place the semicolon, it will print it on the same line, okay? Because in the printf works like an IDE or like Word. You say to the printf to print Argon, then your cursor is here, and you say it to print Xenon, so it will print following the Argon. If I want to print Xenon here, I have to say to print that I want to print it on a new line. To do this, at the end of this printf or at the beginning of this one, I will put a special character called \n. The \n is a special character that says the printf to create a new line. So either you create a new line at the end of the first line or at the beginning of the second line, okay? And now if we run it, it will print Xenon on the second line and not on the same line as Argon. So we've seen how to create and use some multiple types of variable, and we can combine all of them. For example, our character name is Argon, and I will give it a life of 20, for example, and you are able to print it with the format. So Here is the power of format printing. If you want character named some variable as a life of another variable, and then you give the character name here, so it will replace the first person's by this variable, and here you give the life and it will replace the second person's by the second variable. So you have to be sure that here the first variable will be a text variable and the second variable will be an integer variable. If we run it here, it will say character name Argon has a life of 20. I made some typos, but you have the spirit. And if we want to, for example, print another line, we can use \n, so it will create a new line and print something here. It will print on a new line. Now you have all the keys to create variables, use variables, and display variables on the user screen. Now that we've seen variable, I want to present you conditions, because in programs, sometimes you want to do actions only at one condition, and it's possible, and I will show you how to do that. For example, let's take an example with our life and regeneration. So let's say I have a life of 15, and regeneration will only be 1 by 1, so I want to regenerate 1 by 1 point of life. But I have a max life, okay? So I don't want this limit to be passed out. And maybe this limit will be 20. So I only have 20 points of life at maximum, and if my life is already at 20, I don't want it to be regenerated. So let's see, we can use the if statement, okay? Inside parentheses, we will write a condition. So if life is less or equal, no, just less than max life, brackets, we can regenerate. So life equal life plus regeneration. Don't forget the semicolon at the end of the instruction. And now, if we print the life, %d, because it's an integer, and life, and we run it, life will be 16. Oh, just made a typo. So copy paste, and yes, life will be 16. If this condition is not respected, life will not be regenerate. So for example, if we already have life equal to max life and we run it, life stay at 20 and not add 1, so it is not 21. So in the condition we used the less operators. We can also use the greater operator. So if life is greater than max life, we do not regenerate. It's an operator we can use. For example, we can use if max life is greater than life, so we can regenerate in this way. We can also use the equal operator, but equal is already to assign some values to variables, so it will not be used as the equal in conditions. So we just write double equal, and this means that you want to test if life is equal to max life. If you want to test if life is not equal to max life, replace the first equal by exclamation point. So here, if max life is different than life, the life will be regenerated. But maybe if life is greater than max life, it will also work because life is different than max life. Here it's 22 and it's regenerate, so it will be added 1, and here it will be printed 23. So here's the operators: less or equal, because if you want to test if life is less or equal than max life, equal, not equal, greater, and greater than equal, the same way, less than equal. So you always write the less or greater at first and the second equal at the second place, in case of less or equal, or in case of greater or equal. So now let's take a completely different example. For example, let's create an enemy life. Maybe we'll assign 20. Let's create a mana stat, so it's basically our power to attack. And let's create an enemy defense stat. For example, 8. So I want to attack an enemy, and I want to would attack him only if his life is not 0. If his life is 0, it don't be relevant to attack him. So if enemy life is different to 0, and our mana stat is higher than enemy defense stat. I made a typo in defense. So I want to write two conditions in one if, and I can do that with the AND operator. So this double little sign, double AND, will create another condition. So here, if mana stat is superior than enemy defense stat, if the both conditions are true, so if enemy life is not 0 and our mana stat is greater than enemy defense stat, we can attack him. So enemy life will decrease, for example, -5. If we print enemy life now, you see both of conditions are true. So enemy life here is 20, which is different than 0, and mana stat is 20, which is greater than 8. So enemy life will be 15. But maybe sometimes the conditions are not true. For example, enemy defense stat will be greater than our mana stat, and in this case, the enemy life will not change. So if one of these both condition is not true, this line will not be executed. But we want, for example, if we don't attack, we want to print a message to say we can't attack. So there's a statement here called else. And with that, you can, if the condition here is not true, so because of the end, if one of these conditions are not true, lines between these curly braces will be executed. So here we just want to print a message: can't attack enemy. Here it will print, but because I forgot a \n, it will be printed on the same line. If I here write a \n, it will create a new line to print the following line. So can't attack enemy, here it is executed. This line is not executed, and the enemy life stays at 20 if now the conditions are respected. So 20 is greater than 10. This line is not executed, but this one is, and enemy life decreased by 5. Now let's imagine you want only one of this condition to be true. You have a statement, the OR statement will be double pipe. It's under the sex on your keyboard. And so with this statement, this condition will be true if enemy life is different than 0, or if mana stat is greater than enemy defense stat. So here, for example, enemy life is different than 0 because it's 20, so the all condition will be true. Even if enemy defense stat is greater than mana stat, this line will be executed and this line will not be executed. This is the OR statement. Now let's take a last example to explain a new statement called the else if. So let's create a variable called life and make it to 20. A variable to max life. It will be a limit, so our life will not be greater than max life. Create a mana stat. For example, 20, 22, 20 also like life. Let's create a variable called mana needed to regenerate. So if you want to gain life, you have your mana to be greater than this variable. So example, let's make it 10 and create a regenerate point. So this variable is for regenerate. If you want to regenerate your life, it will be by this amount of points. So we want here to regenerate, but we don't want our life to be greater than max life, and we want our mana stats to be greater than mana needed to regenerate, to have the capacity to regenerate. So it will be an if statement, and we have two conditions, so we will use the AND statement. So if life is less or equal than max life minus regenerate points, because if our life is between max life and max life minus regenerate points, if we do life plus regenerate points, it will be greater than max life, so we don't want that, so we have to check this. And mana stat is greater or equal than mana needed to regenerate. So if this both conditions are true, we want our life to be equal to previous life plus regenerate points. But now, what if life is between max life and max life minus regenerate point? We want our life to only regenerate the amount we need to be equal to max life, so it doesn't be greater than max life. So otherwise, if, and this is the statement called else if, it will only execute it if this condition is false and the condition inside this parenthesis is true. So else if life is less than max life, and we want to copy and paste this condition, mana stats is greater or equal than mana needed to regenerate. So in both cases, we want our mana to be greater than mana needed, so we can regenerate. But in one condition, we have our life less than max life minus regenerate points, so we regenerate at this amount of points. And in the other case, our life is too high to regenerate at this amount of points, so we want it to regenerate to be equal to max life. So we just have to say life is equal to max life. Now, if none of the statements are true, we just have this else. So if in this case, if life is greater than max life, or if mana stat is less than mana needed, we can't regenerate. So we tell our player a message, cannot regenerate \n. So we create a new line at the end of our message, and here we will print the life. So %d and our life. And now if we run, so here life will be 25 because it's less than max life minus regenerate points, so this condition is true. And the mana needed to regenerate is less than mana stats, so mana stat is greater than mana needed to regenerate. So this condition is also true, so it will execute this line. So life will be equal to previous life plus 5, so 25, and it will print here. If we run, life is equal to 25. I can just write a message here, it will be more clear. Life is equal to 25. Now if life is, for example, 28, this condition will be false because life is only at 2 points of max life, and it needs to be at least 5 points to max life, but this condition will be true and this one also be true. So here this line will be executed and life will be equal to max life. So here life will be equal to 30. I have a typo again. Run. Life is equal to 30, so life is equal to max life. And now if our mana stat is lesser than mana needed to regenerate, this condition will be false, this condition too, so it will not pass through the if nor the else if, so it will pass in the else statement and it will print cannot regenerate, and our life will be 28 like it was before. So you've seen how you use if statements, how you make conditions with and or, for example, and the else if and else. So now you can use variables and you can operate on variables under some conditions, and it will be very helpful for programs later. Now that you've seen how to write conditions, you are ready to see how to write loops. Loops are very useful when you want to execute a certain code multiple times. You can use conditions to stop this loop. For example, we will see the first loop called the while loop. So, as a first example, let's create an enemy life and set it to 20. And let's create an attack stat. So each time you attack the enemy, his life will decrease by the attack stat. For example, it's 5, so each time you attack the enemy will lose 5 points of life. And we want to attack the enemy while his life is not at 0. So you can use while loops. Inside the parenthesis, you write a condition. So while enemy life is greater than 0, then curly braces, and here you write the lines of code you want to execute multiple times. So here we want to decrease the enemy life by the attack stat. So each time the program will pass through this loop, enemy life will decrease by 5, and we will display it on our screen. Enemy life I forgot to set the types of our two variables. Okay, we print it, we add \n to create a new line, and here we will see at the end the result. Enemy life point okay, let's run it. And you will see the enemy life decrease, so it will be 15, then 10, then 5, then 0. And if we set the print just after, before the decreasing, we will see a better result as it begin with 20, then it passes here, so it's 15. It loops. This line is re-executed, so it's 15 now because it passes here once. Then it passes here again and again and again until enemy life is 0. So this condition is not true. It will out the while loop and then print this line. So we've seen the while loop, and now I want to introduce you another type of loop called for loop. The for loop is used when you know how many times you want the loop to do, and it comes generally with a counter, and I will show you this with an example. So imagine you have an enemy life set to 20 and an attack stats set to 2, for example. So each time we attack the enemy life decreases by 2. I want to create an attack that make multiple attacks. So for example, I want to attack 5 times in a row. To do this, we will use the for loop. So we will use for parenthesis, and inside this parenthesis, we'll write a specific syntax that is a little more complicated than the while loop. So as I said, the for loop comes with a counter, so we will initialize the counter. So it's type integer. We generally called it I. You can call it as you want. You can call it counter. You can call it as you want, but it's generally called I. And you set it the first value. Here it will be 0. Then you, after the first semicolon, you write the condition like in a while. So the condition while the for loop will be executed. So here we want to be executed for I equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this will be 5 times. So I want I to be less than 5. And in the third part of this syntax, we will write I++. So we mean here that every loop we increase I by 1. This both syntax means the same thing. I equal I plus 1 and I++. So here the loop will be executed 5 times, and inside this loop we will print the enemy life, $d, display enemy life, and we will decrease it by attack stats. At the end of the loop, I want to print the enemy life. So we'll add this line, and I will add a \n here to create a new line each time we loop. So here, let's run this. And oh, I forgot a semicolon, so it returned an error. And here we'll see at the beginning the enemy life is 20 as we set it here, and then enemy life just decrease 2 by 2, and it will decrease 5 times, so 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4, and 5 times as we said here. Let's now use the counter, because as we said, the for loop comes with a counter and we can use it inside the for loop. For example, we want the attack stat to be added by 1 each time of loop. So the first time we will attack the enemy and decrease his life by 2 points, but the second time it will be 3 points, the third time it will be 4 points, etc., etc. So the attack gains power as the loop continues. So to do that, each time we are in the loop, we can increase attack stats by 1, so make attack stat plus plus or attack stats equal attack stat plus 1, or we can use the I. We can use the counter, so here it will decrease attack stats, so the base attack stats plus I at each time. So the first time I is equal to 0, so it will only be the attack stats, but then I will be equal to 1, so it will decrease attack stat plus 1, so 3, then it will decrease by 4, etc, etc. Let's run it to see. So the first time enemy life is 20, the first time it decreased by 2, so the second time it will be 18, and it decreased by 3, so it will be 15, decreased by 4, so it will be 11, decreased by 5, so it will be 6, and decreased by 6, so the enemy life at the end is 0, and we won, and yes, we have won against the enemy. Thank you for listening this course in C that taught you the basics. In the next course, you will learn the functions and arrays in C. Thank you again. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and goodbye everyone.